How much money do you need to retire early on a $5,000 monthly budget, a $10,000 monthly budget, or even a $15,000 monthly budget? So what I'm going to do in this video is go through another case study, and I'm going to show you some of the traditional methods people use to solve this question, but I'm also going to show you a different approach, an approach that adds in factors that the traditional methods completely ignore, because these factors really can dramatically change how you plan out your retirement, and you don't want to miss them. But over the past 2 decades, there's been a widely used method that has been leading people to an outcome that they may not even realize they're heading for. And let me show you what I mean by that. I want you to imagine that you have a $1 million portfolio. Say you're invested in a 60-40 allocation, and we follow one of the traditional rules of thumb, right? You spend 4% of your portfolio this year, and you retire at 60, and then you continue this level of inflation-adjusted spending essentially for the rest of your life. Now, will that lead to a successful retirement? And if we run the scenario, this is one of the many calculators you can use online that performs this type of analysis, and it's going to show you, hey, at this level of spending I'm describing here, you have a 94% chance of success. You can hit your goal. That's an A in school, right? Your retirement's in good shape. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because if we scroll down further here, the reality is that this level of spending might lead you in a direction where your $1 million portfolio ends up doubling in size, or even ending up with $8 million here. So yes, spending like this gives you a high chance of not running out of money, but so does spending half of that. So does working longer. So how do we prevent this? How do we help you spend enough so that you don't run out of money, but also not regret what you haven't done if you could have taken a different approach? So let's go through this different approach and see how something different can better balance the risk in order to generate a $5,000 monthly budget, $10,000 monthly budget, or even a $15,000 monthly budget for your early retirement. So let's take a look at a case study of Mike and Lisa and see, based on their situation, what the traditional rules would say they could spend versus if we add in more levers that can make a big difference in overall what it takes for them to retire early. So again, let's meet Mike and Lisa, not real names, of course, but as far as ages, they're both currently age 60 and they want to retire yesterday. They want to retire immediately. They live in the state of California, a state that, as many of you know, has one of the highest income tax rates, which will be a big factor for their plan. And they're in great health. We're going to assume that in their plan, they're going to live longer than 55% of people their age, which are some of the actuarial numbers we use for a lot of plans we build. So for each of these scenarios, the plan is going to be about 35 years in length. All right, next let's look at income outside of the portfolio. So we can assume for each one of these 3 examples I'm going to go through, Mike has around $3,000 per month available to him for Social Security at full retirement age, which will be at 67, and Lisa has $2,000 per month available at full retirement age. And as far as savings go, just for simplicity, we're gonna assume that all their money saved for retirement, of course, outside their emergency fund, yes, we'll assume they have that, is going to be in traditional IRA. So it's all pre-tax money, and it's honestly one of the most common ways people save. And we're also gonna assume that about a 7% annualized rate of return, just for illustration purposes from their portfolio. But what you're gonna see is what it might take for them in a portfolio to generate $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 in retirement income if we pull some really important levers here. Okay, so let's start out with a $5,000 budget, and you can see what sort of direction the traditional method might take them versus the different approach. So again, if we start with the traditional method, just like I showed you in the beginning, what that would look like is if they need about $5,000 per month, which is about $60,000 per year, we would basically do some simple math. We'd say, okay, dividing $60,000 by 4%, the result you would get is about a $1.5 million portfolio need. And if we use that same calculator we used at the beginning of the video and run the numbers, that would, again, give us a 94% chance of success of spending at that type of level. But is that a good thing? Well, maybe on paper, but once again, Mike and Lisa might be in a position of regret knowing that you never were able to maximize the full potential of their resources. But that raises an important question. At $5,000 per month, if we add in those different tweaks, is a $1.5 million portfolio overestimating what it takes for them to retire early, and what might be a more realistic amount in savings to generate this level of income for them? So let's run the same scenario and show what would be more of a realistic amount of savings they could expect to target a $5,000 per month spend. And you're gonna start to see how adding in those levers to your planning can make a massive difference. So if I run the same exact scenario, but you can see now we're using a again, the risk-based guardrails approach, but we're changing their total portfolio balance to only $700,000 as far as the target. Not saying this is the amount for all of you watching to need to generate this, because there's of course a few assumptions we're going through here, but you can see that the targeted net income that they can generate from a portfolio is just over $5,000 net of taxes here. So why can a portfolio that is half the size of what the 4% rule would recommend generate this level of income? Well, because the traditional method, wouldn't that not suggest you can only take $28,000 from this size of portfolio, 4% of $700,000? But why can they take more than double what someone using the 4% or the traditional method might recommend from a $700,000 portfolio? Well, again, the reason why is in this scenario is that in their case, we're adding in those two crucial variables that most advisors miss when they're doing their planning. And let me know when you start to see it, because I'm going to share my screen again here. And if we look at their starting balance of $700,000 of the portfolio, if their portfolio were to drop by 17%, does it make sense to continue with this level of spending? Well, if we're using the 4% rule and the portfolio was $1.5 million, they would say yes. But instead, what gives them the ability to retire early with so much less right here is if the portfolio were to drop 17%, they would have to lower their monthly income by only about $200, a little over $200 here. And that's going to start relieving pressure from any sort of sequence of returns risk. But if the portfolio were to grow by about 5%, they would also get an increase of around $260 per month. So to make this work, when, not if, markets decline, we need to take a temporary pay cut until things get better in order for this to work. The second factor I think that most of you that are quick with math will notice is they're taking a 9% withdrawal rate here. I know this sounds crazy, but I want to pull this up and see if you start to notice something here. You can see that in the cash flows, again, they would start withdrawals at around $64,000 per year, so about 9% of the portfolio for the first 7 years. But look at what happens in the year 2031 when Social Security kicks in. Their total portfolio withdrawals are completely slashed at this point. So let's run a simulation to see what sort of adjustments in income we can expect throughout their retirement. And it's important to know that rather than just giving them a probability of success metric, I'm going to show you running a probability of adjustment to their income using this approach. So again, based on generating $5,000 per month and also using a $700,000 portfolio to retire early, we can see that on average, they're going to get an increase of income every 1 year. And on the flip side, it's showing that every 71 years, we can expect an average decrease of about 5%. Now, why is that the case? Why is it that the probability of adjustment is pretty unlikely for them? Well, it's because they have Social Security, and that's going to make up over 95% of their income needed. So by delaying Social Security, being dynamic when we're talking about spending, and replacing withdrawals as they collect Social Security in the future, we can estimate that based on their scenario, it takes roughly half of what something like the 4% rule would suggest to retire. So this isn't financial advice to say that everyone watching here can retire at 60 with this amount, because again, there's more to this illustration, but your takeaway is that affording a monthly spend of $5,000 doesn't just come down to saying $1.5 million in a portfolio. You can start to see that those other two factors that we went through, like other cash flows and being dynamic, can really change what you need in a portfolio. And then you can start using a portfolio as a tool more than an end goal. But what if Mike and Lisa, they changed their mind, they came to me and said, actually, you know what? We want to spend $10,000. What if Social Security will not make up 95% of their income? What does it take really to help them spend $10,000 per month comfortably? So again, let's demonstrate how we would solve this using some of the traditional rules. So if we assume they need $120,000 per year and we divide that by 4%, that would again assume they even need a larger portfolio of around $3 million. And once again, with a $3 million portfolio, you're going to be in a situation where your spending levels are going to give you a really high probability of success if you follow that. But you would be in the 94, and again, once again, you'd be in the 94% success rate category, but you're once again potentially leaving yourself in a position of regret. So let's now look at a risk-based approach, but factor in now, hey, more of your income is now not going to be guaranteed by the government. So let me show you what I mean. And I'm going to demonstrate, again, the risk-based dynamic withdrawal plan and test once again a more realistic portfolio number than the 4% rule for them to generate $10,000 per month. But before we get into that, I'm going to show you one other thing that the traditional methods get wrong. And it actually goes counterintuitive to what some of the best research says about real life retirement spending. And it's all because of this. If you look at retirement spending in reality, it actually tends to follow what many people call the retirement spending smile. Many of you are watching, maybe your parents or friends have been retired for 15 or 20 years, and you're starting to see that, their overall health just isn't going to have them go and spend at the same pace as it used to be. And actually the research shows that their spending is affected by that. Now, again, this isn't everyone, but many retirees in real life actually have different levels of spending as they age in retirement. So they don't necessarily take that inflation adjusted spending for the rest of their lives as they get older. There's the go-go years, which is the early retirement crowd, the slow-go years where you're no longer spending a ton, and then you go to the no-go years where maybe your spending might start to ramp up again because of health costs. So I'm going to apply that spending level to the next two examples of $10,000 and $15,000 a month and really show you what's possible as far as generating income. So if we now factor in those risk-based guardrails, changing withdrawals once Social Security kicks in, and also the retirement smile, how does that affect what we need in a portfolio to make this happen? So once again, I'm going to test a more realistic portfolio, say of around $2.3 million, which is actually $700,000 less than what the traditional method would suggest. We can generate around $11,400 in a gross income. And of course, we take out taxes of around 10%. That's going to leave you with around $10,000 in net income. So now I'm going to show you how this all looks visually, and you can start to see that there's a little bit of a hump here as it goes along in the beginning of retirement, and then it starts to slope a little bit downwards as their inflation adjusted spending it starts to slow down, and finally later on there's a little bit of a ramp up here due to potential health expenses later in life. And again, that's the result of them spending a little bit more early on. So how much more can we spend when they start retirement if we factor in the research-based retirement spending versus a more conservative inflation adjusted strategy? Well, if we compare the two strategies here, we can see that if we assume that your spending will constantly increase throughout retirement, we really shouldn't spend as much. It's actually saying we should spend around $1,000 less than what we expect to spend if you did follow that retirement spending smile. And again, the reason why is we're assuming they will need to spend more at that constant rate over time versus spending a little bit less as they slow down, not giving yourself an inflation adjustment as you get older. So let's run a simulation to see what the chances of an income adjustment is now that more income is dependent on the portfolio rather than Social Security, and now that we're factoring in the retirement spending smile. And if we run another simulation here, we see that a $2.3 million portfolio with a $10,000 per month net income, they can likely expect an average increase here of every 2 years, about 6%. And on the flip side, we can see that on average, now it's dropped down to about every 33 years, we expect a 6% decrease. So I hope you're starting to see that the portfolio does play a role in what you can expect to spend, but there is no rule how much you can actually spend. It's actually more based on risk, longevity, and some of the factors that we're talking. And at this size of a portfolio, there is a higher chance of adjustment compared to $5,000 per month, where more of your Social Security will make up the difference. Okay, so let's finally see how much it might take to generate a $15,000 per month retirement spend, and there's going to be a little bit of a difference here. But once again, do we really need a $4.5 million portfolio as the traditional method would suggest to generate this level of spending for Mike and Lisa? Let's find out. So let's start with the more realistic balance of $4 million. We could likely have less, but this is just a number we're gonna test here. So $500,000 less than what the other income strategy would say. Now, you'll notice one thing has a lot bigger of an impact than it did with a $5,000 monthly budget or even a $10,000 monthly budget. And that's going to be one variable that we did include earlier, but now it's going to have the biggest impact on the portfolio need, and that is going to be taxes. And that's because if we assume all that $4 million is in a traditional IRA, taxes are going to make a huge impact. So not only do you have to factor in other income sources, be dynamic with your spending, and follow that retirement smile if you wish, but we now have a factor that's going to be pretty large as far as what sort of expense. And you actually have to generate a lot more income to get that net after tax income, where we're actually going to have to withdraw around $18,000 per month to get down to that $15,000 net income. Now, in a perfect world, I know we don't live in a perfect world, this is an example, but you would get to early retirement and have savings in something like a taxable brokerage account, or you have enough cash and sort of thing, so we don't get crushed in taxes like Mike and Lisa will because of required minimum distributions. But what does it look like if we run the simulation now that we have to take a lot more money out in taxes? And with this plan, since this has the highest level of dependence on a portfolio withdrawal, the highest amount of taxes paid, we can see that the average increase of 6% here is going to happen about every 2 years. But now we have a scenario where if they want to spend $15,000 per month net after taxes, they're more likely to have to face some downward adjustments in retirement because the average increase here is now every 25 years at 6%. So they can likely expect to have some downwards adjustments if they face a bear market in retirement. So we just went through 3 different monthly budgets in retirement, and we tested the lower bounces compared to what the traditional methods would lead you to believe. So now you understand that there's not a one-size-fits-all portfolio you need to retire early or a withdrawal rate you need to hit to spend a certain amount of money. But the reality is that by adding different realistic factors and understanding that retirement isn't pass-fail, you start to understand that the rules of thumb are good for back in the napkin math. They'll give you a good starting place, but they just no longer apply. Your portfolio is a tool to help you retire early, and you can treat retirement as a probability of adjustment based on what you have rather than a probability of success. So let's review and talk about what really can impact you and what it takes for you to retire early. And the first one, of course, is that dynamic distribution plan. Having more of a guardrails type approach to withdrawing money from your account could potentially allow you to have more income during the good times and also not run the risk of running out of money because you just followed a rule of thumb all the way down to 0. And we talked about that, how the traditional rules are a little bit incomplete. And if you're willing to be more flexible, more often than not, we saw you got bumps in spending throughout your retirement. The second factor that'll have a huge impact on your own early retirement is other cash flows outside the portfolio. We saw that in the first example. They need a much smaller portfolio to retire early because Social Security is going to cover almost 95% of their income needs. Things like your Social Security, pensions, rental income, or even if you have to work a part-time job that's a ton of fun and maybe more recreational, will completely change the amount you need to save in order to retire early. The third factor that you need to consider, and one that makes a big impact for you, is going to be longevity. You see in the scenario that we're using a 35-year retirement as a baseline since they want to retire early at 60. However, if you feel like you're on borrowed time and you say, you know what, that's not more realistic, I think that's overkill to plan that long. For you, you might need a lot less saved. Nobody knows the expiration of their birth certificate, but this is something that you can adjust accordingly depending on your family history. And lastly, of course, your expenses have a huge impact on the size of the portfolio you need. When we change the spending strategy and factor in that retirement smile, we saw that you can spend more earlier on in retirement because realistically, we know that spending as we get older, at least statistically, will slow down. So understanding that your expenses will actually look like a little bit different as you go through each level of retirement will make a big impact on how much you need. Finally is your tax rate. Now today, in this example, we assumed everything was in tax deferred accounts for simplicity, and we didn't talk about Roth conversions or tax strategy, but depending on the breakdown of your account types, what state you live in, property taxes, local taxes, all those need to be factored in as you figure out how much you can generate on an after-tax basis from your portfolio. But I'm guessing most of you watching do not want to leave the IRS a tip, and a good tax plan can add thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars back in your pocket. So I definitely recommended watching this video right here because you want to start thinking about how much you can withdraw from money on an after-tax basis in a tax-smart way. Again, this is Matt. I'm a certified financial planner and advisor with Wonder Advisors. If you'd like to talk with me or someone on my team about your financial plan, you click the link in the description and chat with one of us. And I appreciate you guys watching, and I will catch you guys on the next one.